Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. If you're watching this video and it's Salah time, please pause it and go pray and come back when you're done. Please check out the description section of this video to support the channel. It's 2025 and Israel have a $150 million propaganda spending budget in place to justify their ethnic cleansing and genocide of Palestinians. And what better way to do that than to not only carry out their false flag events that they pin on Islamic extremist groups that they themselves fund, but also by getting their stooges like Elon Musk to dig up decades-old issues that involve perpetrators who are only Islamic by name and making them relevant again in order to dehumanize Muslims through fear-mongering, with the aim of creating more hatred and prejudice towards us. And speaking of stooges, like clockwork, slimy serpents Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson, amongst many others, slithered out of their snake holes to spit more venom in the mix, in order to further hype up the same ancient grooming scandal in the UK. Notice how no one is talking about Gaza anymore? Even though in the first week of 2025, Israel killed another 74 Palestinian children, and that's just the ones that have been reported. There's probably hundreds more under the rubble. Add that to the approximate 18,000 kids Israel have already killed since October 7th, 2023. By the way, that's one deceased Palestinian child every 30 minutes from then to now, and you can see why Israel would be so desperate to sway global public opinion in their favour by making the world despise the people they are wiping out and stealing land from. The official death toll in Gaza is over 50,000 people, again because these are the civilians that have either been reported or have had their bodies found. But according to British Palestinian surgeon Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta, there is strong evidence the number is closer to 300,000. Before we look at Shapiro and Peterson doing their latest Zionist clown show, attention-diverting dances to portray Muslims as subhuman savages and the religion of Islam as evil, let's take a look at political scientist Norman Finkelstein humiliate these Daily Wire shills.
So Ben Shapiro may know any of these, various divisions, but what these people do is they flaunt their degree and then pretend they have authority to speak on everything. No, you really don't have authority to speak on everything. You may have taken one course, you may have read 4 books on a particular topic. That doesn't give you expertise, that doesn't endow you with authority, but you hear the prefix Harvard Law School graduate and everybody knows bedazzled by it. He doesn't have a clue what he's talking about when he talks about Israel, Palestine. He knows enough to know he knows nothing. And that's why he'll never debate me. Because he knows I will totally humiliate him. He did a series on Israel, Palestine. It was rife with the most basic errors. I'll give you one example. So there's a June 1967 war, correct? And then a few months later, after the June 1967 war, the Arab states meet in a summit. And after the war, they expressed their anger and indignation over what Israel had done. You know what Ben Shapiro says in his video? First, there was the Arab summit at Khartoum, which rejected Israel. And then there was the 1967 war. It's like saying World War II came before World War I. He's a complete imbecile, a total imbecile. Nobody who has taken a 100 level course would make that kind of error. The other one who's a moron is Jordan Peterson. He's got nice hair plugs. I'll grant him that. But beyond that, come on. This is not serious. He's interviewed by Piers Morgan. And Piers Morgan says, so, Mr. Peterson, can you tell us what happened on October 7th? And he says, well, what happened was the mullahs in Iran were losing power, and so they decided to rattle the chain of Hamas, and Hamas launched the attack. I was like, what are you talking about? All the intelligence information shows that neither Hezbollah nor Iran even knew the attack was going to happen. There's Ben Shapiro. There's Jordan Peterson. They're so full of themselves. So full of themselves. Now look, if you're very smart, I can accept you're full of yourself. It's an achievement. I wish you were more humble, but okay. But to be full of yourself and you don't have a clue what you're talking about, it's so revolting.
Mr. Finkelstein, as a Jewish man, has no reason to show bias towards Palestine or Muslims. He is as neutral as you can get. And as you saw, Dr. Finkelstein gave clear examples of why Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro are not only incompetent and unreliable, but are also revolting imbeciles that struggle to state basic historic facts, and that is why they fear debating him. I think Professor Finkelstein was being too nice by assuming that Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson do and say things simply out of stupidity, as they are openly on Israel's payroll to tell outright lies in order to bolster support for that regime, while at the same time acting as apologists for their war crimes. Norman was correct to call out Shapiro and Peterson as fast-talking grifters that use their degrees to present themselves as qualified to speak on political issues, when in actuality their aim is to dupe others into siding with the pro-Israel propaganda they are pushing. A perfect example of this is the latest propaganda exercise both Peterson and Shapiro took part in over the last few days, dehumanizing Muslim men by portraying them all as rapists and linking that to the teachings of Islam, which is a slanderous lie beyond imagination. Let's take a look.
40 out of 50 Muslim majority countries in the world are authoritarian hellholes. There are certainly doctrines in Islam that are very, very difficult to square with free, liberal, Western, Christian democracies. We need something like an international symposium on the relationship between the Christian West and the Islamic world. It's pretty bloody easy for the rich Muslim countries who are absolutely awash in, I would say, undeserved oil money to moralize about the superiority of their culture. I mean, the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia were a little, fringe tribal cult before the West stupidly dumped $1 trillion on them and allowed them to propagandize the entire world. They would have been a backwoods Arab tribe lost in the desert forever if it wasn't for oil money. About 3/4 of UK Muslims would be perfectly content if Sharia law happened to be the principle of the day for the UK as a whole, and that it would be fine if Islam became the national religion. Now, that's 75%. Address the problem of psychopathic fundamentalism in our own culture. Instead, what we do is we allow them unlimited license to rape and pillage for racially motivated reasons. It's not just rape, it's brutal, sadistic, demeaning, racially motivated rape. So it's rape of the most sadistic and brutal kind. Yeah. This isn't date rape. This isn't, oh my God, a relationship went wrong.
Yeah, I agree.
It isn't misunderstanding.
Peterson said Islamic doctrines are not compatible with what he called the liberal Christian West. This is a stupid statement on so many levels. Number one, in the West, liberalism is birthed out of atheism, not Christianity. And number two, Jordan Peterson's whole shaky brand is built upon opposing the same liberal values he claims are incompatible with Islam. And number three, even though Islam, Christianity, and Judaism have many shared and crossover beliefs, studies reveal that the Bible is a much more violent book than the Quran. So do you mean Islam is not compatible with the West because it's not violent enough, Jordan? How hypocritical is Jordan Peterson? He sits there disrespecting Muslim countries for not being democratic nations, basically judging them and demanding that they emulate the West, while at the same time crying about Western Muslims wanting Sharia law. I get it, Peterson thinks Muslims all over the world should do as they are told by non-Muslims in regards to laws and politics, but shouldn't dare desire a legal system that they think would benefit Muslims and non-Muslims alike. Under Sharia law, all Sikh groomers would face the death penalty. Under Western law, they dwell in prisons that resemble boarding schools and holiday camps. Clearly, Sharia has the correct solution. Peterson speaks as if the West is the land of milk and honey, when in fact your so-called liberal democracy seems to be failing. This is evident through the gender confusion, the lack of religious boundaries on physical intimacy, the racial discrimination, the extremely high crime rate, the excessive abuse of alcohol and intoxicants, and the worrying decline in mental health of the general population. Jordan Peterson, as a recovering benzo addict that struggles with anxiety and depression, having had several public mental breakdowns himself, is a prime example of this failure. Sounds like you need Sharia to clean your act up, JP. Jordan Peterson could not contain his bitterness at the fact that many Muslim countries are extremely wealthy nations, despite not incorporating the societal model of Western democracy. This bitter old man said Islamic countries can't moralize about culture because without their undeserved oil money, they would be backwards Arab tribes in the desert somewhere. Anyone else smell the bigoted stink of white supremacy? I know it burns you up inside, Jordan, but that oil money is God-given. And the West West didn't invest trillions of dollars into the Arab oil industry out of the kindness of their hearts. They did it as a business move, which involves the exploitation of their own citizens via overinflated fuel and energy prices they have to pay. And since you're speaking of undeserved money, I guess you probably think the West colonizing and robbing Africa and Asia of all their resources that the West still use to this very day, while the descendants of the people that were colonized starve and die of disease, is well deserved. And don't call anyone's culture backwards and uncivilized when in your culture you don't even clean your backside properly after you defecate. Peterson also claimed that the West allows immigrants to engage in racially motivated rapes. Last time I checked, there were solid laws in place to prevent and or punish such horrible crimes. So again, you're talking nonsense. And did you guys catch how Peterson disturbingly described a hierarchy of rape when he casually talked about this heinous act occurring in the context of a date or between a couple as somehow being more tolerable than grooming? No, Jordan, all forms of rape are equally disgusting and wrong, and all men who do such things are equally as evil. Jordan's true motive is to paint men from Muslim backgrounds as worse when they do it, because that in turn dehumanizes all Muslims, and thus aids his masters in Israel justifying eliminating people that look similar, while at the same time distracting the world away from the fact that they're committing a genocide. Now let's look at Ben Shapiro's perfectly synchronized version of this propaganda.
The Council on American Islamic Relations' original foundation was by people who were closely associated with Hamas. Like, there are actual real systemic problems in the United States with radical Islam, which of course is the same sort of thematic that you're seeing in the UK right now. A place called Rochdale in the UK. White girls were preyed on by Muslim men in gangs, Muslim rape gangs, and that's what they are. Elon went after Keir Starmer for it, and deservedly so. Keir Starmer, with the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, talking about the real problems of the UK in 2024, which include a radical uptick since October 7th in Islamophobia. And Ayan's story is sort of, ahead of its time. And being an ex-Muslim from Africa who had immigrated to the Netherlands, they wouldn't give her immigration status because of her perspective. I mean, they essentially decided that she was a persona non grata because of her perspective on immigration in the country that Ayan came from. Geert Wilders is now leading the largest party, right? And Geert Wilders is a very right-wing, anti-immigrant and anti-Islam leader in the Netherlands. So, and when it comes to immigration, like, we've had many waves of immigration in the United States: Irish, German, Italian, Swedish, Jewish, Russian, right? A huge number of immigrants in the United States. But once you change that system to make it so that you are neither expected to assimilate, consequences are going to be pretty dire for any civilization that attempts that.
As you saw, Shapiro, like the robot he is, dropped in the Hamas and October 7th references, subconsciously giving away Israel's involvement in all of this. Why bring that up, Ben, when you're primarily concerned about Muslims in the US and UK? According to Ben, it seems a decades-old scandal in the UK that has resulted in most of the criminals involved being put behind bars is more of a pressing issue than his beloved Israel conducting a live genocide, which is happening right now. And predictably, Ben would dismiss Islamophobia as being a real issue in the West, while ironically using Islamophobic rhetoric to do so. Ben spoke about the supposed problem of radical Islam in America, but he conveniently didn't mention the problem of Zionism, which drains the US of billions of dollars in taxes to fund Israel's never-ending wars in the Middle East. And not only that, he also left out the dangerous control Zionists have over Western politics, banking, the media, and entertainment. I'd say from that evidence, Zionism is a much more radical and extreme ideology than Islam, hands down. Shapiro labelled the Pakistani perpetrators involved in the decade-old UK grooming scandal as Muslim gangs, despite their crimes reflecting the opposite of what Islam teaches, and despite the fact that every other demographic of Muslims in the UK were not involved. Around 2.5% of Brits are Pakistani, around 6.5% are Muslims of various different races. To label these gangs as Muslim is a deliberate and underhanded misrepresentation on Shapiro's part. It's no coincidence that Ben Shapiro's initials spell BS, as that is what he mostly talks about. And of course, Shapiro would compliment his fellow anti-Islam shells Elon Musk and Geert Wilders, as they repeat the same nonsense as he does from the exact same anti-Muslim playbook. I'm sure you guys noticed how Ben Shapiro listed off, in his opinion, positive examples of immigration to the West, that being Jewish, Irish, Italian, Russian, and Swedish, basically white immigration, and only spoke of an ex-Muslim African immigrant, Ayan Hirsi, in a positive way, maybe because she rejects her religious roots and echoes the same anti-Muslim sentiments as Ben does. Shapiro also failed to mention the IDF Jewish supremacists in Israel that carried out inhuman racially motivated rapes against Palestinian prisoners, and that the most high-profile cases involving this type of crime over the last century has been perpetrated by his fellow Zionists Epstein and Weinstein, who also had ties to the Israeli government. We can all say that no matter what community we're from, that the grooming scandal in the UK was a despicable crime. But to blame all Muslims for it is disgusting, dishonest propaganda, especially since the perpetrators showed no resemblance of the practice of Islam in their conduct whatsoever. It's horrible what happened to the British girls who were the victims of this, and that we weren't able to stop it. But what's also horrible is what is happening to Palestinian children and adults as we speak, which we are still able to stop. Thank you for watching. Make sure to join my my free Telegram group via the link in the description, where we as Muslims can speak freely and without censorship about issues like this. And remember to like, subscribe and become a channel member for access to exclusive content. Until next time, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah.